Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, I'm going to be taking a look at Ubuntu 23.10, which was released October 12, 2023. So I also wanted to mention that today's video is brought to you today and by my sponsors. And I have both people that have joined the channel and people that are on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really helps. But let's take a look a little bit about what some of the new things are. I think the first place we better start, however, is with the architectures that are supported. So if you have a machine that's based on x86 64 or AMD 64, that's supported. It also supports ARM 64. It will run on IBM Z and Linux One. They also support Raspberry Pi, and in this release, they support Raspberry Pi 5. I'm just starting to see hardware announcements for pre-order for Raspberry Pi 5, but so far it's not out yet. They also support RISC-V. They have support in this release for the Star 5.2, one from Sci-Fi called the P550. That's the Horse Creek board. We're not expecting to see those now, according to their website, until the end of the year. Those will go out to select developers. And next year, in 2024, they'll be ramping up for general distribution of the board. What do you need to run this? So obviously you need a dual core CPU at a minimum. Quad core is recommended. They say 4 gig of RAM. I would say that's probably enough for light workloads, but if you do have a lot of browser windows open, maybe you also have maybe you're using Thunderbird, or maybe you're also using LibreOffice, then you're probably going to want 8 gig in order to run this efficiently. They say 25 gig of disk space. I would say more like 125 gig. The base operating system alone is almost 10 gig. And we'll talk a little bit about what comes with the base operating system. So you need at least 1024 by 768 resolution. However, you're probably going to find that you're going to need at least 1280 and possibly full HD support. There are a number of flavors of Ubuntu 23.10, and those include the base desktop or the flagship. This is GNOME, and it's based on GNOME 45. They also have a flavor called Edubuntu, which is a children's oriented education. It's based on KDE. And speaking of KDE, Kubuntu is the KDE-based flavor. That is based on 5.27, and that would be the 8th patch release. And that just came out in September. So that is the most current one that's available from the KDE folks at the time I'm making this video. There's also Lubuntu, and that is LXQt. That's version 1.3.0 of LXQt. And then, of course, there's a number of supporting pieces of software under that in order for it to run. Ubuntu Budgie, that is based on 10.8, so that's a very new release. Haven't seen too many new releases of Budgie, and this is, of course, a new one. Ubuntu Cinnamon is 5.8.4. Ubuntu Kylin, I couldn't find any information about that, specific versions of that desktop, but that is available. That, of course, is the one that Ubuntu built for use in China. Ubuntu Mate is Mate, and that'll be version 126.2. There's also Ubuntu Studio, that is Avian Graphics. I believe that's also KDE. Ubuntu Unity is Unity 7.7. I think that was the one that was also supported on 2304. Xubuntu, XFCE, that's based on 4.18. GNOME has been updated, of course, as we mentioned, to include the latest GNOME release. I think in recent memory, this is the first time Ubuntu is kind of synced up with GNOME. They've always usually had some areas where they've had like the latest version of GNOME, and yet some of the software packages lag behind a bit, but not this time. They also have released ZFS or ZFS. That is back as a choice that was removed in 2304 as a build choice for your root file system. And of course, that now is back. So as an installation option, they say it's experimental still. And there's probably some reasons for that. So they still don't support ZFS encryption, but they said they are planning that for a future release. ZFS is based on 2.2.0, and that's release candidate 3. There's also a TPM-backed full disk encryption. Now, Ubuntu has always had full disk encryption, but they've used LUX in the past. So don't confuse this with LUX. It's not. This one comes from Ubuntu Core, and it stores the key directly in TPM 2.0. So it's installed. The key is your decryption key is stored inside the TPM chip. There's some caveats for this. One, you do have to have full support for not only UEFI, but also Secure Boot. And I had some issues trying to get Secure Boot to work. I finally got it on my laptop to work, but wasn't successful in installing full disk encryption on either a virtual machine or on hardware. Now, I haven't gone through, there was a patch update to the installer, and I haven't tried that since, but I suspect the problem is that I have modules which are installed externally. So like NVIDIA, for example, on that laptop, and that might have been the thing that was preventing it from installing successfully. There's a very limited set of hardware that's supported at this time, hence the reason why it's experimental, right? Network Manager has been updated. They now use Netplan as the default setting storage backend. And this is the first time I've ever seen them do that. So they've always used Netplan on their server side of Ubuntu, and now they are bringing it to the desktop as well. So from a standpoint of consistency, I think Ubuntu is trying to get to the point where they have the ability to configure these laptops in an enterprise setting so they can be managed from the cloud, if you will. So I think this is all part of that migration in order to get there. Ubuntu has updated their app store. They replaced their previous, what they called, I think it was called the Snap Store. And this one is completely redesigned, and it's based on the Flutter toolkit for its UI. It looks nice. It looks fresh. It's very fast, as far as I can tell. Also, Firefox is now a native Wayland application, although I did test this on X11 and it does still work. Although I did not test it extensively to see if it would have problems under X11. They have moved the old firmware updater was embedded as part of the application store. And so you had to have all this code up and running for the firmware updater to detect an update with your BIOS or drivers that are internal to your machine. So now they've split out that firmware updater so it runs as a standalone application and takes up a lot less resources on your machine. The other one is they have updated Ubuntu fonts. They replaced their older ones, and I mean, it's subtle, but and if you don't like it, you can download the package Ubuntu Classic. I think it's called Fonts-Ubuntu-Classic package, and restore to the older font if you prefer those. There are so many security features in this release. So Ubuntu now, 23.10 now has the ability to require applications to have an AppArmor profile that are using user unprivileged namespaces. So those would typically be applications that are confining themselves inside of a container. Google's Chrome, for example, does that. There's a number of applications which are doing that. There's a problem with running a security issue potentially with applications running in user space. I think what they found is, at least with Google's research, that over 44% of the vulnerabilities that Google found in Linux had to do with applications running in user unprivileged namespaces that were invoking IO ring. So and that would basically is exposing privileged requests to unprivileged namespaces, which that's never a good idea, never a good idea. So this is an attempt to try to mitigate that risk. But you do have to set up AppArmor, and why did they create unprivileged user namespaces? Well, in the past, we've always had to use setuid or setgood in order to be able to give an application more permissions than if it needed, semi-root, or it had privileges that it needed in the file space in order to operate. But unprivileged user namespaces allows them to do that without having to resort to a setuid or get or setgood mechanism in order to do that. Those are pretty broad brush, and they generally give way too much permissions to an application. So unprivileged namespaces were meant to try to help with that. So unprivileged namespaces, while they're beneficial, they come with known vulnerabilities, which we just talked about. So you do have to set up an AppArmor profile yourself. It's off by default, so once you turn it on, you may find applications breaking, and the reason for that is you'll see when it attempts to launch, there'll be a denied message in your audit log. If you're capturing your audit, it'll be in your syslog if you're not. So if you see that, that's an indicator that you need to set up an AppArmor profile for it. So some other security features is one of the other ones is improvements to the PPA management. So in the previous versions of most Linux distributions, PPAs were managed with a traditional file that was stored in it's etc apt sources.list.d, and that was just a text file. You had to download the GPG key separately, and that got stored in another directory in there. So they were sort of out of sync. You could remove the sources list and the key would still stick around. There was abuses that was being done by some PPA repos that would reuse the same PGP key. And so this is an enhancement to attempt to address that. PPAs in 23.10 now use the deb 822 format, and that basically embeds the key with the PPA description, and they use a signed by field that's in there to identify the key. This does a couple of things. First, it removes the PPA's repos. If you remove the PPA, your key gets removed with it. The second thing it does is it establishes a one-to-one relationship between every PPA and every key. So you can't share them anymore. They're dedicated to a specific PPA. And you can't use other keys to assign an existing PPA or any PPA for that matter. This is based on Linux Kernel 6.5. There's a number of enhancements here. The first one is there's a new system call, and that's cache stat. That displays the cache state for all the files and summarizes the number of cache pages, dirty pages, cached pages marked for write back, etc. This version of the kernel also supplies the initial support for USB 4 v.2 or v2. It also supports MIDI 2.0. So also, Ubuntu made a number of changes. They've added Z standard compression for modules in order to shorten the boot time for Linux. And that does seem to help. I mean, it is much faster in boot. There's also a new AppArmor stacking LSM set that's available in here. So there's also updated Shift FS patches. And they've also enabled multi-gen, least recently used page reclaiming. So that should have some performance benefit you may experience if you turn that on, and you do have to turn it on. If you do turn that on, you may experience some regression in performance. I saw that on one of my machines and I turned it off. .config, this is the tuning of low latency kernels for desktop-oriented tasks. So some of the low latency components are starting to move into the desktop to help with our user experiences, and that I think is a good sign that they're doing that. Ceph support for ID mapped mounts is now provided as well. There's also parallel CPU bring up in this kernel. That's mostly for cloud environments, but it really speeds up the boot time for cloud environments. So I don't know if there'll be any direct benefit to us on the desktop. Maybe, maybe not. As far as the toolchain is concerned, GCC is updated to version 13.2.0, and then all the utilities under bin utils to 2.41, glib to 2.38. Python has 3.11, but if you want, you can install 3.12. That's available if you want it. I don't know if it was a limitation in the testing, because 3.12 is pretty new. Perl 5.36.0, LLVM 15, but again, LLVM 17 is available if you prefer to use that. The Rust toolchain is version 1.71. OpenJDK is version 17, but again, OpenJDK 21 is provided. But just realize that they don't use OpenJDK 21 for packaged builds, so just be aware of that. So Go is 1.21. So I've been using this for about a week now, kind of on and off, using it both on hardware and on virtual machines. I did install this as UEFI. I had to go make some changes to my VM host. One thing I did notice is that legacy BIOS boots are being kind of moved to the background, and they really want you to use UEFI now, so that's fine. So I migrated over to that and then attempted to get the secure boot to work, but no joy getting Proxmox to come up. I don't know if they just don't have the proper key support. That was the indication of the error messages, so but it's not a problem for Ubuntu. It works just fine on hardware. I was able to bring it up on my laptop, no big deal at all. So speed, it's improved, and we'll look at the benchmarks over even the last release, and I suspect that's both in the booting speed and in some general performance improvements that were made in the kernel, as well as the speed up that they're doing with the low latency kernel in the system. They are obviously moving more and more towards snaps. However, you'll find on the App Store that if you do a search, you won't find this if you don't do a search. If you just pull applications up from what's being displayed, you're going to get a snap install. However, you do a search for the application, there's a drop-down list at the top that you can select it to either be a snap or a Debian package. Sneaky, but But there are some that aren't available as Debian packages at all. I mean, they are definitely moving that way. Also, by the way, I didn't mention this, the full disk encryption using TPM requires Snap as well, because that's how it's implemented. Yeah, we'll take a look at the benchmarks at the end of this, and we'll walk through those. All in all, there's some interesting new features in this release. And from what I can see, that they have definitely been moving the performance of snaps along. That delay that we used to see the first time when you'd launch a Snap app, gone. It's gone in this release. So some of the things I've been critical about are gone. So that's good. They're moving in the right direction for that. Well, let's go through some of these benchmarks. Now, this is the default Ubuntu 2310. This is ext3 file system, or ext4, I mean. The file system is ext4. I have Manjaro, Fedora, and devour OS. The older, the last version of Ubuntu 2304. This is Linux Mint Debian Edition 6. This is Debian 12 and Linux Mint 212. Those are the ones I'm comparing against today. So as far as the harmonic mean, it got Ubuntu did really well. It got about 553.55. That is the highest score overall for that. And then for IOPS, it fell a little bit, and Linux Mint took that, and followed by 2304, just slightly. This probably is down in the noise. So they're about the same, as far. So why is this one so much faster? Same drive, everything's same. Interesting. But Fedora is down here at the bottom because, they're using Btrfs. And so, and copy on write doesn't perform well in I/O tests. And it doesn't matter if it's Btrfs or ZFS. They're not going to perform well as a root file system. So I will hold to that. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So the harmonic mean of megabytes per second. Ubuntu, these are all real close. I mean, they're geometric mean of all the tests, 31,421.79. So this gives you an idea of, about where Ubuntu stands. And it's not, I mean, today's operating systems are running so close together. Number of first place finishes in all of these tests. Manjaro overall did pretty well. 20 first place finishes on all the tests. Now I test everything, the kernel, the memory, all that stuff in the file system. So this, is including all that. Last place finishes, Fedora did the worst, 28 in the last place. But, this is so close that you could pile almost all those three together. In fact, all four of them you could pile together. They're so close to one another. All in all, not too bad. All right, so that's all I had for today on Ubuntu 2310. A lot of changes in this, a lot of new things, and I hope you enjoy it. Take a look at the release. I think pick one of the spins that you enjoy, flavors. Try one of the flavors that you enjoy, and hope to see you in the next one. And bye for now.